Solid rocket motor nozzle gimbal checks are underway. Ignition system is armed. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
You're listening to the Survive2Thrive radio network. Survive, the number 2, thrive.net. Thank you for your attention. The following broadcast is brought to you by the good people at enerfood.com. That's ENERFOOD.com. This broadcast is not intended to be used as medical advice. The FDA, the WHO, the WTO, and the U.S. federal government has prohibited us from making certain claims and truths. You are now locked into Total Health Freedom with Darren Craddock, a twice-weekly analysis of news and information designed to help you achieve optimum health and expose the international tyranny keeping us sick and more easily controlled by the powers that be. Darren has traveled the world, learned from masters, and believes in you. Now, here he is, the man with the plan, Darren Craddock.
Darren Craddock, man with a plan, supposedly. And thank you for listening, tuning in. I hope you like the new intro. We're trying to freshen things up a little bit here and there. And I wanted to talk to you this evening. I'm very privileged to have a guest on this evening, a very interesting person who I've spoken with and whose DVD, which is incredible, I've been looking at this afternoon. One of the things I love about Marjory, who we're going to bring on in just a second, is she has lived this truth. This is not someone who's written books and never done the truth of it. She's literally lived an off-grid, pretty much, food production reality for several years now with a family of 4, her kids and her husband. And basically what we're going to talk about this evening is practical ideas about how you can get started in changing a life of dependence into a life of independence. Marjory, are you there?
I am, Darren. Can you hear me?
I most certainly can. Can you hear me?
Yep, we're doing good. We're connected.
Excellent. So tell me a little bit about yourself, Marjory, and how you got started in this whole taking care of growing your own or creating your own food and basically becoming less dependent on the system.
It's been an amazing journey. I used to be a professional real estate investor, money manager, and fortunately we saw the big crash coming and managed to get our investors out of the housing market just in time. But I began to look around and say, what other systems could collapse or what other kind of things that, could fall apart. And, well, as you know, we live in some very precarious times, and there's really not much that you can do about most of it. Climate change or all the different wars or the unbelievable corruption in the government or, peak oil or all these things that are coming at us and more, possible pandemics, overuse of antibiotics. The epidemic of disease, there's so much and there's not much that you could do about it. And I felt really, helpless. And, well, what can I do? Like, my most basic need is food and water. And I said, if I know how to grow food, I'm going to be able to, those skills are pretty much translatable in a lot of places. There's a whole level of security that I'll have and since have had that just gives me a level of independence and freedom and distance from the whole mess. Because when you can feed yourself, suddenly all those other things just don't really have as much importance to you. And it is important I still call my senator and do action things, but it doesn't affect me nearly as deeply as somebody who's utterly dependent on the grocery store and the municipal water system.
No, that's so true. And I mean, as we both know, the contacting your senators and representatives is definitely a worthwhile endeavor, although they don't always listen. I frequently get emails back with excuses of why they didn't listen to what I had to say. But, you know, again, what you've got to do many things, but when it comes down to it, if you're not taking care of number one, meaning yourself and your family, really, should a precarious situation, it's already precarious, but should a disastrous situation manifest itself, who is going to feel it? We're all going to feel it. And so the ones who are going to feel it less are the ones who are the most prepared. And consequently, being able to take care of your needs in food, water, and other needs, such as, you know, getting rid of your waste, for example. A lot of people don't realize that, you know, we just go into the toilet, flush the chain, and don't think about it anymore. Just consider it's going to be gone, and off it goes, right? But if the system crashed to the kind of extent that it could, we might not have any sewage facilities. We might not have running water anymore. So how do we get rid of our waste? How do we get clean water? And how do we feed ourselves? And these are realities you've been through and have come out the other side feeling confident.
You know, I've been amazed at the transformation, because we got into it from a place of fear and panic, and deep concern, obviously. And since then, though, the unbelievable fulfillment and the sense of pride and the deep spiritual connection with, you know, when you're eating food that you've raised, whether it's a plant or an animal, and you eat that and you participate with that, and you're starting to work with genetics, and you know, before, you know, I really had no clue about the weather. I mean, it might inconvenience me and buy an umbrella or something like that. Now I'm studying clouds, but my life is dependent on the weather. You know, there's a whole lot of bigger shifts, and I'm much more interested in how things work globally. You know, what plant species are working, and how can I'm actually working much more with other species. So, you know, most things in our life, in a modern lifestyle, is a commodity. You get your laptop, you get your television, your car, your chairs. But I'm working with, you know, this variety of tomato, or does this corn, does this corn and I get along? Do we get along real well? You know, some plants don't grow. I'm actually interacting with many different species at a whole different level, and it's very exciting. It's almost mind-boggling how much of the world is going on around us, and we're mostly connected into a tube or something.
That's so true. We're so very disconnected, really, from a level of reality that sustains us, and we're so connected to a level of reality that doesn't sustain us. It's kind of a complete flip, I believe, of where we most likely should be, on a sustainable level at least. I mean, if you're connected and you know everything about the last episodes of Friends, or what's coming up next in some, you know, playoff in some game. Not that I'm saying it's wrong, and to be in, you know, to have some level of entertainment from some kind of TV shows or games or whatever. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, as long as it doesn't take up so much of your time, because it's fruitless, really, at the end of the day. I mean, it doesn't provide you with anything.
And you're right. I mean, there is some point when you got to say, look, I can't look at how bad things are, and I need to focus on the positive things. And that's also part of what going into the garden or working with the livestock is all about. But if people, I also was completely oblivious to the absolute vulnerability of the food supply that we depend on, and you know, there's only two causes of disease as far as I'm concerned. It's toxicity and malnutrition. You cannot buy the nutrition you need from a grocery store. The levels of nutrition have deteriorated decade after decade after decade. Even if you're eating organic produce, you're not going to get enough for really optimum human health. And then, of course, also most of those things, even if they're organically labeled, are sprayed with all kinds of stuff. What can you do about that? Well,
or genetically modified, for that matter, because let's face it, I mean, you go into a grocery store thinking you're going to get something healthy, and unless you're really well informed, you might think you've got something good, gone out of the grocery store, sit down to a meal, and then a few days later you read an article and realize you fed your kids something that's potentially damaging to their kidneys, their digestive system, etc., because it was made from corn or soy that was genetically modified. So a level of conscious participation in what you put in your body is so crucial.
Yeah, but what can you do? And it's so hard to know. And shopping at farmers markets, quite frankly, for a lot of us is not going to be. A lot of us are not going to be able to afford that. Quite frankly, I mean, we do the best we can, but to buy a whole diet, because those farmers are doing real work. They're not using chemicals and they're not using machines the way big agribusiness does to cut out all the labor costs. So. And actually that work is work. I find a lot, if I'm getting stiff or I'm getting sore or something, or I've been on the computer too long, it's like, oh, you know what? I need to go outside and weed or check on the plants or move the poultry or, do something. I realize, my body wants to be doing something outside.
I've watched your DVD, and I mean, I love the system you have and the setup you have, but the getting out. I noticed that you walk around barefoot, and I find when I do that, my gosh, I feel so much better. I have that it may sound a little kind of out there for some people, but when you literally have your feet in contact with the ground, you actually prevent all kinds of diseases that come from the lack of ability for your body to discharge electromagnetic energy. And they've actually done all sorts of studies in different countries where people were close to power lines, and the people who wore barefoot most of the time didn't succumb to cancers, but the people who wore regular shoes with rubber soles, they did succumb to more cancers. So there's a lot of reasons to just get out there, but if you can kick your shoes off and get out in the grass too, there's a much more of a connection with nature, and also a lot of health benefits from that too.
Well, that's fascinating. I'd never heard that story, but it just totally fits in with, and that's been a whole nother journey. I highly recommend going barefoot, and it's not necessarily always pleasant. In fact, for me, it's been fairly painful. But what it has done is it has taught me how to walk, and my feet have literally taught me more about my own posture and how to walk than I ever knew before. Like years and years of wearing shoes, and especially all those supported shoes and everything. My knees were messed up and my ankles were messed up, and how I used my body was not effective. And just by simply going barefoot and paying attention, my whole body has realigned. It's been amazing. Now, a lot of that has also come with, stubbed toes and getting pricked, but, if you're not in the adventure for the fun of it, if you're living life, you're going to get a few bruises there and there, right?
Right, absolutely. Now, some of the things that I kind of gleaned from your DVD, and we'll talk about this, it's called Food Production Systems. It's just one of the most amazing DVDs I have ever seen, because it's so practical, and it shows that you've lived this. And there's so much instructional information out there that you almost need a degree to be able to figure out. This is simple, easy information. Simple to the watcher, obviously the viewer, that is. Obviously for you, it's taken a lot of effort and a lot of time, a lot of trial and a lot of error that you've learned from to come to where you are today. It seems like that's part of the process, but what I love about this DVD that you've put together, Marjory, is that it enables people to basically step into this without making all the mistakes. Everyone's going to make some mistakes, but this gives something that they can use to start getting more prepared. And I mean, we recommend, at our company, Enter Health Botanicals, we've created a survival pail, a 40-day, 40-night food supply that's all organic that people can store away. But, that's great. It's great preparedness. But long term, you've got to learn to grow your own food, because what happens when your stored food runs out? So I see it as a transitional thing, to have stored food. But in the long term, you need to learn what will grow in your area. Start joining gardening clubs, for example. Get this DVD, start putting things into practice, because this is applicable nationwide. This is not something that's only applicable where we live in South and Central Texas. So...
thank you, Darren. Yeah, we've actually sold the DVD in about 40 different countries around the world now, and we've everywhere in the U.S. and we get a lot of people Canada, Montana, Wyoming, Maine, and those places, and they're like, we know the species are not going to work here, or some of these systems are not going to work here, but the detailed presentation and the principles are universal. So fertility is a thing that you've got to work on, and just the demonstration of the systems. And we created the DVD. I'm very passionate. There is a crisis. We're just dipping our feet into the crisis that is probably going to drown most of us. It's really going to be ugly if anybody's even halfway aware of what's going on in the world.
I know. I mean, many of our listeners, Marjory, are aware, but not everyone's taken all the steps they can. And that's one of the things I love about your DVD is that, if you haven't taken the steps because you're afraid to, because you think you're going to fail at it, because a lot of people out there think, well, my gosh, there's so much to learn. And that's why, in your DVD you say, well, get started. Just start with a small single garden bed. And, we don't know when this crisis is going to start. It's already wetting our toes. We don't know when it's going to start drowning us. On some levels, it already has started drowning us, but many of us are not aware of that. But it's so fragile, the system, that it behooves everybody to get very active and get started on what can I do today, and there's no better way.
I can give you one really great little thing to get started in, the power of what just one small little thing can do for you, and that is just a couple of herbs on the windowsill, and some basil or rosemary or oregano. These guys are kind of tough, and you say, it's a couple of herbs. But you're learning to develop a relationship of every day. Put them on a windowsill where you're by it all the time, like your kitchen sink or something, like somewhere where you're going to see it all the time. And you want to just kind of I'm going to pay attention to these plants at least once a day. And just starting that little habit of just for a minute looking at them, and then you'll notice, when they're really dry, their leaves kind of droop and it looks like this. Or, I know Marjory told me not to use this, but I went ahead and put some Miracle Grow on them, and now I put too much, all the leaves are yellow. I overwatered them, and now it's all getting spotted, and it looks like this. Well, what you're learning there is totally applicable to whether you have a garden bed outside or whether you're managing acres of crops, noticing how, the plants change and respond to different, or, the light. I took them, we haven't had any sun in a while, and they're getting pale, or I put them out too much in the sun, and the things are curling up and burning. So you're starting to notice and learn how these things respond, which is not a part of our culture. But the other thing is you see, you know how to grow a few herbs. Well, I will tell you that appetite fatigue is a real deal. I have been, for myself, when I first started this, I said, okay, I'm pretty hardcore. I'm like, I'm going to only eat what I grow from the land, and I will tell you that appetite fatigue is a real deal.
It really is.
I loosened that up and said, I'm going to live a little bit. I'm addicted to chocolate, and I enjoy a few things every now and then. But you know what? Just a few fresh herbs in those rice and beans that you might have been eating for the 10th time, this last 2 weeks, and you and your group are hunkered down, but you know how to maybe take care of some herbs. You could be a hero for a small group like that with just knowing how to grow a few herbs. So
Absolutely.
Don't underestimate the power. Yeah.
No, it's interesting. I kind of we were doing last week a few videos to give people more information about our survival pail, and I just basically, a lot of people are very concerned when you're dealing with beans and grains and things like that. If you've got stored foods, that they'll take forever to cook, and they're just going to taste bland. Well, in our pail, we have a small spice mix. It's got some paprika, some onion powder, garlic powder, and I think cayenne. And we have a little package of miso in there, too, which is organic. And all I did is I just soaked both the grains and the beans together overnight. And it took 20 minutes to cook it. And then I threw in a little bit of spice and a little bit of miso at the end, mixed it all up. And I was standing there eating it, as we were doing the video. And a couple other guys that were with me, so I guess I'll try it. I don't really like that stuff. And they said, wow, that's like prepared in storable food. It actually tasted good. So a little bit of seasoning, be it your herbs, be it a few little things that you've grown, it is fascinating what the taste that it can change, how it can transform something that may seem bland or you may think is bland, because let's face it, most of us have been educated by the current system to be addicted to very powerful tastes, and very often that's through MSG and other chemicals that are damaging to us. But learning to grow your own and appreciate your own, but just adding a little flavor can make all the difference.
Yeah, and I have to agree with you, Darren, about having backup food supplies. And we initially bought a bunch of the beans, and we're incorporating more and more of that into our daily diet so that it's not a sudden transition. But especially with price volatility now, we have not been producing anywhere near enough food for the population we have. And the weather, I don't care what you believe about weather, whether it's HARP or not, or it doesn't matter. The end of the day is we're losing crops. We're losing the winter wheat crop in Texas and mostly in Arkansas is totally destroyed by the
drought.
And
I think Arkansas's rice crop as well by the flooding was destroyed, a big chunk of it too.
There you go. But it's happening everywhere. Russia, China, South America. It's the production is just not there, and we're getting squeezed more and more. And I think that the manufacturers have been messing with the packaging to kind of make it not so obvious, but we're fast hitting a real brick wall here. I mean, it's already caused revolutions like in the Middle East, Egypt.
Yeah, Tunisia and Egypt, for example.
Yeah.
And
that was all about a food riot initially.
Absolutely. And I mean, you made a prediction that you think grocery bills will double this year. What makes you think that? I mean, obviously, we've certainly talked about this with our listeners a lot. I've been noticing that people are selling the same product, but it's a smaller package for the same price. That's obviously a marketing and money-earning technique, but I think there's a reality that we don't have the same luxuries that we've become used to as far as the availability of large amounts of food.
We have three big factors. Actually, there's more, but three of the biggest factors toward why your grocery bill is going to double is, number one is the weather, just as I was talking about. For example, Russia went from being like the third largest world wheat exporter to now out on the open market getting food for their people because they've been having severe droughts. Similar thing, China used to be pretty self-reliant in corn and rice. They're now out buying food on the global market. It's happening all over the place. And the U.S., by the way, is not a net exporter of food. It's very close to almost being a net importer of food. Now, we do export a lot of corn, but we import a lot of vegetables and a lot of other things. So the weather is one of the big factors. If you just can't produce the food, it's not going to be here. The second factor is the U.S. dollar and the economic situation. We are looking at inflation and hyperinflation due to the massive amounts of money printing. There's also some other government things that are going to start coming into play. A lot of governments are now looking at export bans. So I think India is looking at no longer allowing any sugar to be exported, which will hurt the sugar market. They're not a huge sugar producer, but markets are so tight now. One country doing that will cause a spike up in the price of sugar worldwide.
Not that would necessarily be a bad thing, Marjory, because people eat way too much of that. I mean, on some things it might be a good thing, but on other things it's going to be a thing that will literally start wars and cause all sorts of economic collapses worldwide. I mean, we've seen, like you mentioned, Egypt and Tunisia, revolutions occurring. But, the people pretty much they have enough food, the prices have gone up. What happens when the prices are up and there's not enough food?
That's right. And then the third factor is the price of fuel. And I totally agree with you that sugar, and actually almost none of the food that we produce commercially is actually a food. I mean, corn, or all the GMO stuff, it's not really a food, but it is what the majority of the population on this planet is eating, and we need that to keep going unless we want to have mass worldwide chaos. So we'll just continue to talk about it as if it's food. But the price of oil, every aspect of growing food in the large agribusiness world, which is most of what the planet eats, the harvesting and the planting and even the tending, they use chemicals all derived from fossil fuels in one way or another.
Right.
The nitrates they use are derived from natural gas. The carbines, the harvesters, the processors, oftentimes even the packaging, So now, $100 a barrel now is our new reality, and those costs are starting. We've bumped up, in the last 6 months from, say, a $70 a barrel reality, and those costs are moving through the system and pushing prices further up. So between those three big forces of price inflation with massive spending and borrowing by the government, as well as governmental controls, the weather situation, and then the cost of fuel, between those three factors, we are between a rock and a hard place. And I tell people, I hope your grocery bill only doubles.
Right, because it could be much worse than that. And it really, I think, is at a point now where we literally have to learn how to feed ourselves. Of course, that's a challenging thing. I mean, let's look at, for example, your experience, and you've been at this for a while. How much of your food can you realistically grow, and how long does it take you to do that? Because I'm sure a lot of people out there are thinking, well, my gosh, I work 9 to 5, certain times of year it's dark when I get home. How much time do I need to put in to grow enough food to at least supplement my family's needs?
Yeah, how am I going to fit this into an already hugely crowded and busy life? That's excellent. For the record, I grow about half of what I eat. Sometimes a little more, usually not much less, but sometimes depending on the harvest of the season. I barter and trade with neighbors in my community for about another quarter of my food, and then the last quarter, actually, if I wasn't eating it all, I wouldn't be gaining weight. But there's a few things that I really want. Chocolate, again, being one of them. And I work, I'd say, on average, about an hour to 2 hours a day. And I say it's work, but actually the time in the garden for me, or the time with the animals, or the time tending the plants is like my yoga class. It's like my meditation time. The kids, I don't get them involved as much as I would like to. But when it's harvest, they love to come harvest, so it's family time. It's not just out there growing food and working. I've incorporated into all these other aspects. Of course, all of us want to do three things at once, right?
Yeah.
I'm in my garden and I'm weeding, and what I'm doing is I'm collecting. I'm stretching and I'm bending. I'm outside. I'm getting some exercise. I'm getting some yoga. I'm pulling up this
from the sun too.
There you go. And I'm getting this grass out from these plants, and I'm collecting free food for my rabbits. So, I've got a lot going on. I'm also kind of maybe paying attention to the birds and seeing if I can learn what species are what. And there's all kinds of things going on that you can expand your awareness to.
Right.
I have been astonished.
Go ahead.
My level of health has just really skyrocketed from eating highly nutritious, fresh food that we've grown ourselves, that don't have any hormones or antibiotics or chemicals or anything. And, my kids, their eyes are bright, they're doing great in school, they're sharp, they're not, they talk to you, they're involved. And I know it's got to do with the food supply.
Oh, absolutely, because if you look at what the average kid is eating, I mean, it's astonishing. The average kid's eating processed food, and they cannot think straight, because of many of the additives, that disrupt the nervous system, and just the lack of nutrition for building healthy cells, and then plus the toxic buildup on the body that comes from all of those toxic foods. It's astonishing. And I mean, you've really in your DVD, again, it's called Food Production Systems, and you can definitely give out the information, of course, several times after the break. We have a break coming up any moment now. To share this resource with folks out there. I highly recommend it. I've watched the whole thing, and it covers everything from water harvesting to butchering rabbits, even wild game such as squirrels, believe it or not. And I mean, it's fascinating. Growing vegetables, growing fruit trees, having chickens, rabbits, a whole section on butchering animals too. So, I mean, it's really literally an incredible resource, and a very concise resource on one DVD. I mean, literally, you've got a laptop and a DVD, you can go anywhere and have this as a resource to help you make these kinds of transitions. And, Marjorie's not talking about people who have a 30-acre farm. This is applicable for anybody to start off and implement some of these techniques, because whether you're living in an apartment, have a small yard, a big suburban lot, or a farm, this information is invaluable. I mean, it's just so well put together. And it sounds like we're going to break. We'll be back very shortly. Stay with me.
We show them how strong we are, though we kill a million people, we're always ready for it.
With natural and man-made disasters and economic turmoil, if we don't get well prepared, we will most certainly regret it. Good readiness must include storage of high-quality food that will build us up rather than tear us down. Much of the storable food available is full of bad fats, salt, sugar, nutrient-poor refined foods, and even MSG. In response, EnerHealth Botanicals has created our 40-day and 40-night 100% organic preparedness pail. It's GMO-free and has a 10 to 20-year shelf life if stored at 60 degrees or less. Some of the items need cooking, some can be eaten dry, while some can be soaked and sprouted. These are selling out fast at third the price of storable food packages. Call us at 866-762-9238. That's 866-762-9238. Or go to enerfood.com, ENERFOOD.com. 866-762-9238. Or go to ENERFOOD.com.
You're listening to Total Health Freedom with Darren Craddock, sponsored by the good people at enerfood.com. Natural answers for your health, wealth, and well-being. Now, here's Darren Craddock.
Back from the break, folks. What an amazing first half of the show. Lots of great information. Marjory, if somebody had said to you, what are the top 5 or 10 things I can do to get started, what would be your answer to a question like that?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is just go get a few plants in your windowsill, and you can do that anywhere, a condo, apartment, or house, or whatever. If you do have a yard, just start with a little small plot in the back, and I highly recommend starting small because, I got a story here. My husband's grandmother she was one of those people that, grew up growing food and had an acre garden, fed her family, canned, and fed most of the neighborhood. Huge, huge thing. And I said, I'm going to start growing food. And he said, we've got the land. We plowed up an acre. We had an acre of weeds and frustration. Start small. I'm not anywhere near handling an acre full of food at this point in time. That's a lot. So just start small, even a little 4x4 plot, or, maybe a 10x4 if you've got room in your backyard. Some of the feedback we've gotten from people about the DVD was they appreciated the failures. We talked about our failures, what didn't work for us, and I think there's more power in that than almost in the things that were successful, because it demonstrates what not to do. So the first thing is start small and get a couple plants going somewhere, and I'd say buy some plants from a nursery. You can start from seed and that sort of thing, but you'll be more happier if you get some garden starts from somewhere and just get going, and you learn to start from seed a little bit later.
I think almost,
yeah.
My perception, looking at your DVD and also from some of the studies I've done in permaculture and speaking to folks, having guests on, is that really, more than anything, the key to success in growing your own food is in the soil. And you've got to restore fertility, maintain fertility in the soil. Otherwise, you'll always be frustrated.
That's it, Darren, exactly. That was my very second thing was start a compost pile. And, have a lot of people in an urban environment. You can do that under your sink with a worm bin or, a small bin, and there should be no offensive odors. In fact, if there is an offensive odor, then you're not doing something right, and you want to kind of adjust that, either add more, brown stuff or more green stuff or whatever. But the soil fertility, and that was a really hard lesson that took us we wasted quite a few years really, really catching that. And most of the garden vegetables that you and I like to eat require a good, rich, nutrient, mineral-rich soil. And the plants are healthier and more robust. They're able to withstand heat better. They're able to withstand cold better. When you eat those plants, you get those minerals and that nutrition and that life and that vibrancy into your body. And one of the most amazing things to me has been how much better I withstand heat and cold. For example, I'm a native Floridian, and I used to never could stand anything. I mean, if it got down into the 70s, I was reaching for a jacket. I mean, really. Air-conditioned spaces were the Arctic as far as I was concerned. And as I've eaten more and more nutrient-rich, dense foods, and going barefoot, I think helps significantly. I mean, I've noticed myself, like it'll get down to 40 degrees here, and I go, I think I might put some shoes on. I would never have done that before. So it all comes from the soil initially. Right. It all comes from that nutrient-rich, dense soil. And most of us, quite frankly, are not going to be able to afford some nice, rich bottomland somewhere. And even if you do, you're still going to have to continually be working on fertility for your soil. And the way to fix all those soils is compost. And compost is just this miraculous thing that is so stunningly easy to do. I mean, everybody can do it, and we need to be doing it. And it's just a matter of finding things and, scraps of vegetables and leaves and junk mail and whatever that's organic matter that you can compost and turn into fertility and then ultimately gain nutrients out of. So that is my second big tip. You're absolutely right about that, Darren. You've got to work on the soil.
Right. Your DVD, not only do you show a few clips of building a compost pile, and you have composting material beneath your rabbit hutches. So, I mean, there's a lot of really ingenious ideas. Plus, there's a companion CD with a whole slew of ebooks and resources, not just on composting, but on many other subjects. So there's an incredible value in this DVD package. It's not just, like I say, a DVD. It's also that bonus resource CD in there that has some great information. And really, your soil's the key, folks. I mean, whether you're growing food for your rabbits or your chickens, whether you're growing it for yourself, we all need nutrients. And if we don't rebuild the soil, we're going to be lacking at some point.
Yes, and to go back to that, the bonus CD, it's a mini library. And we felt, a lot of people say, why'd you put all those documents in there? Because quite frankly, a lot of them are already out in the public domain. Some of it's original work. But one, they're documents that I've used and I find very useful, and they're a part of my own personal library. But two, I felt that, the Internet is just as precarious as everything else. And, I felt that if they had the DVD and this little mini library in their hands, they'd have enough stuff that they could get, you'd have enough resources to do something. So there's information there on seed saving, on tanning rabbit hides, and 5 different articles on composting, a whole series of design notes by Bill Mollison on permaculture, a whole Texas rainwater harvesting manual, how to build rainwater systems, processing acorns and mesquite beans, and so there's a whole gamut of information that's available there, which, the video is 110 minutes, and this really supplements it and gives it a greater depth of meaning. So it's a resource, and we have people tell us that, I've watched your DVD 10 times, and I understand that because it wasn't just something we made up and slapped up on YouTube. It was crafted over months and months and months of getting the wording, as close as we could get to, conveying information as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible. But I believe that most people aren't going to be looking at this material unless they're in crisis, and they're going to want good information quickly. Right.
But, I encourage people, though, I encourage everyone out there listening to not wait until this all hits. It's nipping at us right now. It's almost like, a plague of mosquitoes. They're biting little parts of our body, and then we get inside, we're inside a screen, we kill a few of them, and then we kind of forget about it for a while. And then we open the door again and go outside, and we get bitten again. Well, it's almost kind of like that's what's happening in our society for those of us who actually go outside of our current reality just a little bit. We start realizing that the whole system's getting upset little by little on many different levels. And while if we sit in front of our TV and watch our favorite shows and just go to work and come back from work and, eat with the family and blah, 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 it's very easy to ignore a lot of what's going on. But we really cannot do this any longer. And that's why I think it's so crucial for us to get useful resources and useful information. Store food, make sure you've got highly nutritious food stored, but start learning some of the essentials about growing your own food, keeping maybe some livestock. I know you found that as far as meat goes, rabbits are probably the most efficient form of animal especially on a small acreage or a small lot, that you can actually keep rabbits and they can breed fairly quickly. They breed like rabbits, of course.
They do. Yes, you're absolutely right. And a lot of people think, oh well, we're going to all eat chicken. And the fact is if you're going to eat a chicken every week, you're going to need a flock of about 50 chickens. And if you're going to have 50 chickens, you're going to have to buy feed for them. And I'm all about developing systems where you don't have to buy anything. Now, of course, you're going to buy things in the beginning to get yourself started, but I'm all about trying to work toward a system where you're not buying. Because if you have to buy feed from a feed store, that's the same as having to go to the grocery store. We're trying to cut that loop out. But rabbits are an excellent meat source, and the main difference is because the chickens ultimately will need to eat grain. The rabbits are herbivores, and they're going to do fine on grass and alfalfa or different things that you can grow. And they're small. I have a 20-foot by 2.5-foot wide rabbit hutch, and it has 8 cages in there. I have usually a buck and 3 breeding toes, and I get 80 to 90 rabbits a year out of that, which for my family of 4, which 2 adults and 2 children, aged 10 and 12, is about half of the protein requirements for our family. That is huge to be able to get that much protein. And of course, there's lots of other things. There's fat and carbohydrates and other things that come with the rabbits, as well as their pelts. And even more importantly, underneath the rabbit cages is their fertility. Their feces is right in a compost pile right underneath that. That's very convenient to where I just taking it over to the garden. It's just a short, almost a pitchfork toss away. So the rabbits are an excellent meat source. They have a hard time breeding in the summer in Texas, so even with that, I'm still able to get that high production. And in climates that are just a little bit cooler, they're going to be able to breed all year round and do even more fabulously. So they're an excellent food source for this climate.
You have eggs too, of course, from the hens, right?
Now, I do have a small flock of chickens, and if you only have a backyard, 2 or 3 laying hens that you kind of let out in free range during the day, they're going to be able to pick up enough stuff, and then whatever little scraps you can feed them, you're going to be fine. You'll be collecting an egg or 2 every day, depending on the season, but that'll be about what you average out of 3 hens, and that's plenty. That's fine for like a good family of 4. That's going to be a reasonable amount of eggs. If you get into a bunch more chickens, and you can support about a dozen of them on a farm lot size of maybe an acre or 2, the chickens aren't going to range much further than that anyway, even if you have more land. And then you could support about a dozen chickens. Just, they love bugs, and they'll be out hunting for stuff, and you may need to, again, supplement them a little bit at different times of the year. But they'll be able to fend for themselves and just produce eggs for you without you basically putting much into it. And again, those are the kind of systems I'm looking for. Where do I get production without me having to go to the grocery store or the feed store, or without me having to do a huge amount of work either? So chickens are fabulous for that. And
right, and a lot of people think of chickens as just a source of meat or a source of eggs, but they have multiple functions too. I mean, you can obviously you collect their feces, and that's a great source of manure, especially once you've composted it, because most avine manure really needs composting, right? But
it does. It's too hot by itself, but that's
right.
It's pretty easily taken care of. You mix it up with some leaves or some
good little compost pile, which is an essential part of your operation anyway. But you can even let them in the garden if you just monitor them so that they can do a little bit of weeding for you. Do some of your work, right?
They can. Now, they're a little bit tricky. I especially like to use them for bug control. They really prefer to eat bugs, and they'll come in your garden. If you have some kind of infestation, you can use them that way. They do tend to scratch a lot, so if I've got a lot of baby young plants, and they'll often love to eat your little baby sprouts. So there's times when you don't want them in there, and there's times when you do. So it's, like most things, each system and each individual will come up with different things. For example, I love geese, and they work really well in my little orchard, but some people can't stand them, Or for example, back when we were learning, we took on some goats, and I found out that I couldn't stand the goats. I was like, I am not a goat person, because I'm trying to have all this edible landscaping and all this orchard, and
they eat everything.
They were competing with me for my food sources, so I'm like, okay, you guys are cabrito, and I'm going to get geese or cows or something.
I like that. You guys are cabrito. That's definitely South Texas. That's wonderful. I love that. But it's true. You got to see what works for you, folks. I mean, I love goat milk cheese and goat milk and all that, but they'll destroy anything that's green pretty quickly if you're not careful.
People love goats, and I have to say that for this bioregion, and we're here in Central Texas, I don't know how far out you're broadcasting, but in this bioregion and a lot of bioregions, goats actually are probably the best animal for this region because they eat almost everything that's here, but it's a very sharp, double-edged sword. Right. And there are a few people that I've seen that really do manage their goats well. They take them out in the morning to go graze in specific areas, and then they bring them back in their pens. And they move them around, and they're very conscientious about where the goats are eating. That is atypical. Most people get a few goats, they put them in a pen until those goats strip everything there, and they've utterly destroyed that land, and then they either move the goats to another pen until it's done, or they sell them, or they just start buying feed for the goats and wondering why the land looks, or maybe they don't even notice that the land looks so bad.
Right.
But, goats I think they're excellent if they're well managed, but there is a lot of trick to that too. So,
Exactly. And I mean, a lot of people probably listening to the show are thinking, well, gosh, does this mean I have to go get a couple of acres so that I can have my little farm and start developing it? I mean, I like to say to people that having seen many of Bill Mollison, who's the founder of permaculture, seeing videos he's put up there and other permaculture sites that have got other videos that are very, very informative, that if you learn what you're doing, you can make a suburban backyard really quite productive. It's really more about learning. First of all, you got to do the composting, and then learning what will work for your area and stacking and packing. You can get a lot in a small space. If you build soil fertility, you can even grow upwards, vertically with certain crops too.
There's a tremendous amount you can do in a backyard, and there's a huge amount that you can produce. And it's almost better if you only start out with a backyard, because then you can't get megalomaniacal tendencies like I have, and it forces you to stay with a small area. And really, you do want to start small and gain some mastery in one small area and then work from there. So start with a small garden. I made the mistake of I invited 20 of my friends over, and we planted a whole orchard with 20 of my friends, and then but they didn't come back every other weekend to help me weed, so I pretty much lost that whole orchard. Start small, start with just a couple of fruit trees and learn how to take care of them. You will be far better off than me, who planted 40 trees, and now I only have a few that survived and I'm totally frustrated because I started too big. So starting small.
I know for my own experience, I planted, I think, 12 fruit trees back in the fall of last year, and I have 5 that survived. And it was very frustrating for me, but I learned from that experience that you've got to mulch around the trees. I don't have any trouble with weeds because it's been so dry this year. But you've got to mulch well. So the mulching's key to keep the moisture in the soil. And also you've got to protect from deer where I am, because they'll just chew. Every time there's a little green shoot that comes out, they'll come along and chew off the leaves. And after a while, the trees start giving up, because they need to photosynthesize, so they got to have
can't regenerate.
their leaves. they can't regenerate. But just a simple thing we were talking about this afternoon, and I'd read about this elsewhere and seen other people doing this, is just putting, a cylindrical fence around your tree. And if you're on the property regularly, then you can, of course, water your trees on a regular basis. Learn a little bit more, call your agricultural extension service and ask them, how often you should water that kind of tree. Peaches will be different from apples will be different from pears, etc., etc. But if you mulch, the water will stay in the soil. And if you build that organic matter up, more water will stay in the soil. I've talked before about, if you have any kind of slope, to build swales and berms and plant your trees in the berms and have the swales catch the water. So when it does rain, you can make the most of that resource.
Yeah, there's a tremendous amount you can do, and it's losing trees is we talk about that a lot in our section. In predators, we also talk a lot. That's another reality. And you don't really necessarily say, do I have deer bothering me? You say, and also the other thing is raccoons. You don't say, do we have raccoons in this area? What you say is, where is the nearest raccoon? Where is the nearest deer? Because you've got them, they're out there. And in a drought situation like this, anything green is looking really, really good. In
Right.
years when we're a little more lush, you don't have to be nearly as concerned. But they're hungry too, and they're out there looking, and if you've got something green and delicious, they're gonna come take it. That's what
So essentially, whether it's a raccoon, a deer, a snake, they can be a predator, whether they're preying on your vegetable matter or on your livestock. Those are concerns you have to learn to deal with, and there are many ways to deal with that in different ways depending upon which situation. But it's something you've got to be cognizant of.
That's right, and we have a whole section in the DVD about that, and we ended up finding for us here, and again we actively use about 2 acres. We've got a little more room. I built that 1 big acre orchard, which was too much. The heart of everything I do is in a small, I maybe a 1,400 square foot area, like a backyard type area. That's where the rabbit tree in the garden is, and that's where the heart of all my food production is. And even if all I had was that backyard, I would still use a dog. I wouldn't have as big a dogs as I have now, but I would still have a dog. A dog, like if I had a backyard, something that would be of a breed that's a little bit bigger, that he could at least hold off a raccoon, make enough noise to where I can get out of bed and come get that raccoon shooed off.
Yeah, you have a question. I don't know if this is pertinent to the raccoons, but you have a little question. I think it's an interesting question to ask, partially because I'm interested in hearing your response. But you asked, do you need a gun to garden? What's that all about?
That's another predator. Yeah, I pretty naive and generally what I think of as a nice and pleasant person, and we make the DVD, and I'm going to my the first thing I'm doing, of course, is going to the local shop owners in Bastrop and saying, would you want to resell this? I'm a local person, this is all about growing food, and I couldn't believe this one shop owner and said, no way, I'm never going to need to grow food. And I said, no, things bad could happen, whatever. And he's like, no, I am never going to need to grow food. And I said, really? I'm like, do you have a bunch of food stored up somewhere? Where do you live? Right? He pulls out some big, black, gigantic, semi-automatic something or other. He lays it on the counter and he says, with this, I'm going to get all the food I need. And I was speechless.
Yeah.
Oh my God, talk about a crash of realities. I'm like, oh my God. And since then, I do a lot of public speaking, a lot of radio interviews, and I've had a lot of people come up to me and go, that's a very common belief, and it's not just Texas. I've actually been on interviews with hosts that have said, that's my plan, is to go out in the countryside and find people like you and rob you. That's my plan if something happens. If the Schumer hits the fan. So that has been a huge wake-up call, realizing how lulled we are into the peace that we have because of we have police and we have a pretty good security system. We have an army and a military. There's law and order rules this land, And as we look at our government deteriorating, we're already looking at situations where they're laying off police and they're releasing criminals out of jails because they can't afford to keep them going. Now, that is gasoline and fire right there, you know.
Right, exactly. Exactly. And so, you know, having a firearm to defend yourself is something, and learning how to use it, of course, is something that is enshrined in our Constitution, and with good reason. Now, of course, most of us would like to believe, you know, with a good, healthy Christian attitude that everyone's going to work together and look after one another when the you-know-what hits the fan, but the reality may not be quite as beautiful.
I don't think it will be, to be honest with you. You know, in a short emergency, you know, weather emergency or something like that, or, you know, tornado hits, and, you know, of course there's an outpouring, and it's a small localized thing, and there's a lot of resources in our country to help address any issues that come up. If we have some sort of nationwide crisis, though, or as we get into this food crisis and food becomes more and more and more expensive, and there is no end in sight. There's production is not going to miraculously come up. The price of oil is not going to miraculously go down. The government is not going to miraculously suddenly start helping people instead of hindering them in every way possible.
They can't even help themselves right now, it would seem. So how are they going to help us if a crunch situation comes around? All we have to do is look back to Katrina and see what a poor job they did of responding to that disaster. So, you know, that's another reason why I always feel that it's so crucial to gain a little bit more responsibility and or I guess not dominance over, but really more an ability to deal with your own food production, to be a little bit more responsible, responsive, robust, prepared, basically.
There's a wonderful movie out called The Power of Community, and it documents how Cuba went from, they had a peak oil crisis when the Soviet Union collapsed. They suddenly lost all of their oil imports and textiles, and they were on they'd done the Green Revolution. They lost all their chemical fertilizers and everything. Overnight, they went into organic. People started walking, and because the buses wouldn't run anymore, and people, they like the average Cuban lost 20 pounds. And they document this in there's a very interesting film and well worth seeing, and very upbeat and positive because Cuba has a lot of natural resources. One of the fascinating things was, you know, in the social strata, in the social echelon, the doctors and the lawyers are kind of at the top. And then you got all the other, you know, school teachers and whatever, and policemen and firemen and whatever, and then you get down to the bottom, you get your farmers and your gardeners, right? Well, right as soon as that crisis hit, it totally reversed 180. The people in the top of the social echelon, the people that were most respected and looked up to and who became leaders overnight were the farmers and the gardeners. And the lawyers and the doctors were out on the street trying to find some food. You know, doctors actually have a little bit more skills that are useful. You know, medical needs are always going to be there, but it totally changed their social structure and overnight. And these old guys that still know how to work oxen but were retired were suddenly, you know, people were talking to them and wanting them to show them, and they were relearning these skills. So there's a lot to it.
I know, it's amazing. Marjory, I'm going to say thank you so much for being on the show. There's so much more to cover. I'd love to have you on again, but I can hear music in the background, which means we're going to break. And
I can too.
We're going to the end. So thank you so much for being on. Food production systems for backyard or small farm. How do they get your DVD?
Our website is backyardfoodproduction.com. That's backyardfoodproduction.com. Just like it says, we're pretty straight up. You will not be disappointed. There are so many people that have been seeing the value and the wisdom of this. Backyardfoodproduction.com. Thank you so much for having me on, Darren. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Marjory. We'll speak soon.
Broadcasting to the U.S. and around the world by way of clear digital audio, 22,500 miles above the planet. This is the Global Star Radio Network.